This episode of The Bill and Callie Show is brought to you by Tiger Plumbing. Whether you need to replace a faucet, overhaul your sump pump, or desludge your drains, call Tiger Plumbing. In today's world, knowing who's at your door is important. Tiger Plumbing sends you your technician's photo, estimated time of arrival, and a little bit about him or her. Hey, Sam likes fishing and camping. Cool.
Hello and welcome to our show. Today we have David Steele, who is a retired FBI agent, and he is currently an adjunct professor at the IB Tech campus here in Valparaiso. So welcome to our show, David.
Thank you very much, Bill.
We appreciate you coming on our show and telling us a bit about your career and tell us a bit about you, first of all, and then some interesting cases that you were on during your career.
Sure, thank you. Well, I was born in what we call the LaPorte, Michigan City area.
No.
In fact, I lived on a road that divided the LaPorte and Michigan City school systems. So when I got off the bus in the evening, you didn't really have to have a particular reason to get into a fight. You know, it's just the kid lived on the wrong side of the street.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I grew up there, went to Michigan City High School, graduated 1965. Back then, Michigan City Elston was a large high school. There was about 615 in my graduating class.
Oh, wow. Big class.
So after graduation, I went to college for about a year, kind of struggled with what I wanted to do. And so my good buddy talked me into joining the United States Marine Corps on what they called a buddy plan. So when we arrived at San Diego, what my buddy had failed to tell me was there would be an initial physical fitness test, which he would fail, and I've never seen my buddy since. I know he's alive and well in California, but there was no further contact, so I don't have a lot of faith in the United States Marine Corps in regards to their buddy plan.
All right.
But it was a somewhat uneventful time that I spent in the Marine Corps, and I mean that was during the Vietnam War, and because just the way things were structured and the way my classes ended and where I was transferred to, my orders were never able to be cut for Vietnam. I initially came out of what we call the basic training, and was selected to go to cryptographic operator school, which is basically just coding and decoding classified messages. And then I was sent to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and actually received my orders for Vietnam, and lo and behold, the Six-Day War in Israel broke out, and nobody knew that it was going to be a six-day war, and so all of our orders were canceled, and we were all about packing ships and getting ready to go to the Middle East, because at that time I was attached to the 2nd Marine Corps Division, and that was the only division that was not in Vietnam. So by the time the Six-Day War was, quote, officially over, I had fallen under 13 months before my time to be discharged, and so they wouldn't send me to Vietnam, because back in those days, deployment was for 13 months at a time. So I came out and went to a small little school in the cornfields called, at that time, Purdue North Central.
Oh. Yeah.
If you know it today, when I went, there was one building.
Oh, wow.
And in fact, I went to Purdue North Central when it actually met in the Barker Mansion in downtown Michigan City.
How about that?
So I graduated from Purdue North Central with a business, economics, and accounting degree. Destined to never be in that field. And so shortly after, in fact, even before I got out of Purdue North Central, I was hired by the LaPorte County Police Department as a patrol officer. And so I graduated. In fact, I was working and getting ready to go to the police academy even before I graduated. So then it was off to Indiana Law Enforcement Academy, and then 10 years with the LaPorte County Police Department. My last 5 years, I was in charge of the jail. Title was the jail commander of the LaPorte County Police Department. During my last year there, I was approached by a special agent from the FBI and asked if I'd ever thought about joining the FBI. And, excuse me, he left me information, basically an application. I filled that application out, and a year later was selected to be a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Spent 23 years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Came out of the academy and came back to Indianapolis for about a year. And then my first basic assignment was to Vermont. And that was to be a 5-year assignment. And we know the FBI changes policies all the time on how long you're going to be someplace. That was 1982, and if you know anything about history, 1982, mortgage rates were about 21%.
Yeah, and they complain about them now.
Yeah. And so I thought I was going to be there 5 years, so I bought a house, only to find out that a year later, the FBI decided to change their program, and I'd only be in Vermont a little less than 2 years. And the bad thing about being assigned to Vermont, two things. Number one, there's more cows in Vermont than there are people. And Vermont is a very, very beautiful state, but the people not so much. The Vermont people love you as a tourist. So you come and you drop your money and then you can go back home.
I think Maine is sort of like that too.
Yeah, they do not like flatlanders. Okay, so Indiana to them is flat land.
They're kind of like, they look upon you as a relative, nice to visit, but we don't want you to stay.
Right.
Yes.
After too long, you're like a fish. You start to stink.
So they don't like flatlanders, they don't like government, and they don't particularly fond of law enforcement. So if you're a brand new special agent from Indiana in Vermont, you don't have a lot of friends outside government people.
Right.
So I was only there a total of about 20 months. And so in January of 1983, I'll transition to one of the cases that I worked. In January of 1983, on a cold, snowy Monday morning, January 11th, I received a call from Detective Michael LeClaire of the Vermont State Police. For whatever reason, Michael had taken kind of a liking to me, and so he kind of took me under his wing. And so when we went out, if I had an investigation to do, I would usually team up with Michael, and he would knock on the door and he would tell the people inside, I have Special Agent Steele of the FBI with me, and yes, you will talk to him. So Michael always just kind of paved the way because he was greatly respected by the people in the district that he worked. So he called me and said, you know, we got kind of a unique case going on here. He said, we have a woman living in New Hampshire, right across the river from Brattleboro, Vermont, who we think went to Texas, faked her death, and came back as an identical twin sister. So while that may in itself not be against the law, why would she do that? And of course the people in the town are, especially those that she worked with before she left, were convinced it was the same woman. And so they're now pressing the local police department for answers. And the reason Vermont was involved is she was working in a book press company on the Vermont side of the river. So Michael told me that, you know, she's going by the name of Terry Martin. Before, if it's the same lady, she was using the name of Robbie Holman, who was married to a tool and die gentleman from Marlow, New Hampshire, by the name of John Holman. And so I said, well, what do we have on this name, Terry Martin? We began to talk about that. And after we did some initial investigation, of course, the technology back then was not quite as fast as it is today, even
Sure.
You know, in the 1980s, as far as computers and teletypes and all the different things. But we finally determined that Terry Martin was an alias name being used by a female drug fugitive out of New York City wanted by the FBI. And we said, wow, that's interesting. We may have a case here.
Yeah.
So Monday was spent just trying to put things together. And finally, the New Hampshire State Police was able to somehow get a picture of this Terry Martin, this fugitive. And so it was decided that on Tuesday morning, the 12th, that New Hampshire State Police and Vermont State Police, New Hampshire State Trooper Barry Hunter was the detective on that side of the river, and Michael LeClaire on our side of the river. They was going to get together and then go to the bookstore, talk to the manager, and see if they could very indiscriminately see Terry, see if she matched the picture so that we could have a plan of attack. So they worked on that and called me late afternoon, and he said, Barry thinks there's a possibility that it could be the same person, Terry Martin, that the FBI is looking for, and this lady. But Michael said, I'm not convinced even a little bit. He said, I'm just not getting the similarities. So we let it go, and on Wednesday morning, the 13th, Michael calls me and he said, we can't just leave this go. And so he said, can you come down and we'll put a plan together? And Brattleboro's about a 2.5-hour drive through the mountains. Of course, it has to be one of those snowy days where there's miserable. So I told him to come down. I got down there, but maybe around 11 o'clock, we sat down, we talked. Barry came over from New Hampshire. We talked some more, and we said, look, why don't we just wait for her to come out of the book press tonight? When she's out in the parking lot, there's 3 of us, there's 1 of her. She's a short, slim little lady. She ain't not going to put up that big of a fight. We ought to be able to just say we need to talk to you.
Sure.
So all the people come flooding out, obviously, bell rings, recess time, everybody comes flooding out to go home. No Audrey Marie Hilly. Mm-hmm. So we're saying, geez. So Michael had already checked to make sure she was working that day. So we waited and waited. About 6 o'clock, here comes this little slim lady out the front door. And meanwhile, a car had pulled in to the parking lot. And we were sitting in our individual vehicles, Vermont State Police, New Hampshire, myself. We'd kind of spread ourselves out in the parking lot. But we came together, got out of the car, walked up to her, and we said, Terry? And she stopped and she looked and she goes, yes? And I said to Terry, I said, well, we have reason to believe that's not your real name. And she said, no, it's not.
So she just right out admitted.
Prior to me saying that, I had to introduce myself and the Vermont and the New Hampshire state troopers. And my personal belief, although I have no proof of this, is that she thought that we knew a lot more than we knew. Since there was 3 agencies involved.
Sure.
I might be able to bluff the FBI, but I'm not going to bluff all 3 agencies. Okay. So we said, well, can we talk to you, preferably not out here in this snowstorm? And she said, yeah. And so Mike LeClaire said, well, why don't we go down to the Brattleboro Police Department? It's warm, we can have a cup of coffee. They got a conference room, we can sit down and just talk a little bit. So we took her down there and we said, Terry, most of the time people change their name because they're running from somebody or they're running from the law. And we said, is that one of the cases? And she said, yes. She says, I'm wanted in Anniston, Alabama for writing bad checks. I looked at Michael and I went, come here, Michael. So we step out of the room. I said, Michael, you brought me all the way down in this crazy weather to arrest someone for writing. So I said to Michael, I said, Michael, you brought me all the way down to Brattleboro in this weather for obviously a state charge. I said, I'm telling you what, it's only about 7 o'clock. You owe me dinner, but not tonight. I'm heading back home tonight before it gets real late. So we went back in the room. We're just talking in generalities there about the bad check and all the problems that she'd had with her life. You know, poor me. And the teletype operator, computer person, kind of went like this. And so I went out and talked with her, and she said, you know, this Terry Martin, you know, you told me her name was also Audrey Marie Hilley, but Audrey Marie Hilley is wanted for murder in Alabama, and she's a fugitive of the FBI.
Ooh, ding,
So,
ding, ding.
so I walk back in the room and I go, Michael, come here. Michael, he said, what we got? I said, we got a lady that's committed 3 to 5 murders out of the state of Alabama. And I said, you can relax a little bit because I'll be handling the case now. And we all laughed about that, and we went back in. We asked her, was she wanted for anything else? Of course, she denied that. Mm-hmm. We said, well, we've just received information that you may be wanted for murder in the state of Alabama. And she said, oh, that's a big mistake. My husband died of some type of stomach cancer, and they're trying to say it was poison. Well, our problem at that point was, as investigators, we didn't have the knowledge to ask intelligent questions. Like, who did you murder? Why did you murder? Because we knew nothing about this at all. And so we put calls into Anniston, Alabama right away and began to glean a little information yet that night. Now, one of the reasons that we were so interested in Terry Martin was because during this whole process, in fact, from the time in early mid-1983 when I arrived in Vermont, one of the major cases that I was briefed on, and was always in the back of the mind of every law enforcement officer in this area, was that 2 top 10 fugitives by the name of Tom Manning and Luke Lavisseur, which were holdovers from the Weathermen Underground. They had bombed several buildings, and they had killed a New Jersey state trooper, or one of their group members had killed a New Jersey state trooper in cold blood on a traffic stop. And we knew Lavisseur and Manning were in Vermont. We found 2 of their safe houses. They were traveling with their family, and we were just always a day late and $1 short. And so when anybody came into town that nobody knew, and all of a sudden they're looking for information how to change their identity, birth certificates under certain names, or coming in faking your own death, immediately your mind went back in those days.
Right.
Are they somehow related to the Lavisseur Manning group? And so this is why where we might have initially, in another type of circumstance, backed off of this a little bit. In this case, we're saying, no, we got to get to the bottom of this. There's too much at stake. So that's what really, in an essence, done Audrey Marie Hilley in. And so then it was a matter of transporting her the next day back to Rutland, Vermont, had a state hearing, and then had a federal hearing on the unlawful flight to avoid apprehension. She didn't contest those. She didn't contest extradition. And the following day, Alabama was there. They flew up, and they took her into immediate custody and back to Anniston, Alabama. And so when we look at this case, when Michael and Barry Hunter out of New Hampshire actually had maybe 3 or 4 more days investigative time than I did, but really within 48 hours, you know, I had arrested a high-profile female serial killer, wrapped it up, and turned the case over. Now, in my case, unlike Barry and LeClaire, for some reason, the state of Alabama only subpoenaed me to come down and testify. And I don't know how they selected that. Maybe they just rolled the die. They said, hey, there's no need for all three of them to come. We're not going to pay that expense. And, or maybe they thought, a federal agent was more impressive to a jury than a state.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know. But anyway, I did go to the trial. We did testify about the arrest. Audrey Marie Hilley was charged with the killing of her husband. She's also responsible for the death of her mother, her mother-in-law, and probably her father-in-law. Although when they didn't exhume the father-in-law's body, but the mother and the mother-in-law, while there was significant amount of arsenic in their bodies, maybe 20% more than normal. In Frank's, it was almost 100 times more than normal. So they were hesitant and decided not to charge her with the other two deaths, even though she fits the description of what we call a serial murder. She also tried to murder her 16-year-old daughter.
Nice.
She was in the hospital from stomach cramps and all kinds of things. They didn't know what was wrong with her. Of course, Hillary had been putting arsenic poisoning in her food. And then when she was in the hospital, she actually went in to the intravenous lines and was shooting arsenic poison straight into her body. By a stroke of luck, a doctor had come in, and spent a considerable amount of, he learned, someone said they were suspicious that they thought Audrey Marie Hilley had given her daughter a shot because Carol was her name. Carol had told a friend, Mom's giving me a shot, but it's not helping. So this doctor came in and really began to examine her. And
Thought it was like a Munchausen's kind of a thing.
Well, no, he immediately seen the white on the fingernails and then in the gums.
Okay, so he knew.
Yeah, and as soon as he knew what to look for, well, of course, it was obvious.
Yeah.
And he contacted the police, and of course, in Anniston, Alabama, Audrey had contacts every place. Everybody knew Audrey, and so she went on the run at that time. Audrey ran to Florida where she met John. She was using the name Robbie Harmon, and then she met John Holman. They went back to New Hampshire as a couple, eventually got married, and then she faked her death in Texas and came back. And so they found her guilty, of course, of first-degree murder. We were very surprised that they didn't use the insanity defense at all, didn't raise it, didn't raise her mental competence at all. And so she was found guilty, sentenced to life plus 20. We knew from the time that Audrey grew up, she had a tremendous influence over men by providing different types of favors, probably, although we have no proof as investigators, we didn't go down that road of sexual favors. So she's in the prison a little over 2 years. It's a snowy January morning. I get a call, and the female voice says, "Do you know who this is?" I said, "Talk to me for a minute." So she only had to talk about 30 seconds, and I knew it was somebody from the South. And I figured somebody from the South calling me. So I took a stab. I said, "Is this Terry Denard from the Anniston Star? The Birmingham Star newspaper?" She said, "Well, you're pretty good." And she said, "Yes, it is." She said, "Has anybody contacted you?" And I said, "Contacted me about what?" She said, "Well, Audrey Marie Hilley got a 3-day pass." I said, "Wait a second. Audrey Marie Hilley's in prison for life plus 20, and she got a 3-day pass?" And I said, "Is the warden a male?" She said, "No, the warden is a female, but the assistant warden who issues the passes is a male."
Yeah.
I said, "Well,
amazing.
Isn't that amazing?"
Yeah.
Wow.
Whoa, that's right.
So this is the only part of the story where I thought something went wrong with all of Audrey's plans right here, because Her and John are in a motel, and she says to John, John, I need for you to go out and buy some groceries. And when John came back, she was gone. Now, speculation on our part is that she had arranged for someone to pick her up at some spot. Okay, but apparently they did not show. And so wherever they were supposed to be picked up was near a woods. So perhaps she was walking in the woods, or the edge of the woods, to avoid detection. But somehow she apparently became lost in the woods. Because she ends up at this farmhouse, and the people don't come home that live in the farmhouse that night. They were out of town. And so instead of breaking into the home, she just went on like a patio type attachment to the house, covered herself up with a rug, and that night we got a freezing rain. And they found her the next morning near death from hypothermia. Rushed to the hospital, and she died later that day. But her knees, her body was scratched up, would be the best word. Her pants were solid mud. And so, but quite a bizarre ending to a bizarre life of Audrey Marie Hilley.
That's, boy, that was fascinating. In fact, when I started doing research on this to follow the case, and I found myself writing notes, and I looked at my notes and said, wow, this reminds me of an investigative map, because this is a complex story dating back to the 50s from when she married her original husband. Now, what I find very interesting, so the information she gives up to you guys is that she's wanted for writing 3 bad checks.
Yes, initially.
But what was interesting is those 3 bad checks were written for life insurance policies on her original husband.
Yes.
And that's how this whole thing started to snowball, so to speak.
And this is not unusual with female serial killers. They're called the comfort killers.
Yeah.
So they don't kill like we think of as male serial killers who kill for lust, sex, rage, control. Female serial killers usually fall into the branch of nurses, medical people that kill in hospitals, or what we call the comfort killer, killing for money. Mm-hmm. And poison, of course, in those instances, well, in both instances, in the hospital, they have access to drugs that will poison people, and then arsenic or other poisons out on the street, and so they're called kind of the comfort killer. And you don't hear a lot about them. Well, we didn't hear a lot about them in the 80s and 90s when the rage was serial killers, the Ted Bundys, the Ed Campers, the Jeff Dahmers, the Richard Speck. Mm-hmm. You didn't hear much about female serial killers.
No.
In fact, the only female serial killer that really comes close to, quote, the male serial killer in recent times is Eileen the Monster, Eileen Wuornos. Yes.
So, from what I understand, when Carol, her daughter, where they found that she was poisoned, they found out some of Carol's friends were coming down with some of the very same symptoms, and they found that they were poisoned as well. So, which calls to mind, gosh, how many people did she actually poison that we probably never even know?
Well, we'll never know. I mean, even the police officers that would respond, because after Frank died, Audrey began this elaborate plan of distracting the community that's around her. She filed a theft report. She filed a report. Somebody tried to set her back porch on fire. And so, the detectives would be there for maybe an hour. Would you like some coffee? Would you like some cookies? What police officer isn't going to take good, warm, homemade cookies?
Sure.
I mean, So, and then her son, who we don't hear a lot about, who was a minister, and basically moved away from Anniston. He doesn't say this outright, but really the subtext there is to get away from family.
Right.
When he came home after Frank's death, he met with Audrey. He said, Mom, you got a problem with your finances now. We got to go to the bank and figure out this insurance check, and these bills have to be paid. He came home on 3 different occasions, and each time he became deathly ill. He would come home that night. he would start to feel bad by the next morning when they were supposed to go to the bank or meet with the lawyers. He'd be deathly ill and couldn't go. And so I think he suspected that she was trying to kill her, didn't want to confront her with it, so basically just quit coming home to Audrey. You know, but Audrey was if there's such a thing as a spoiled child. She had always had. She was the only child, and her mother and father both worked, and they basically gave anything Audrey wanted, she had, and you know, she got used to that lifestyle, and of course when she married Frank, you know, the money wasn't there, or everything that she won wasn't there, and she just spent him into debt continually.
Wow, man, this is one, like I said, this is a many connecting point spiders, if you will.
Oh yes,
spider story where it just goes on and on and on, and that's like, you know, when you deal with someone that's a sociopath, which I think you'd classify her as, wouldn't you? Or
well, today they've kind of changed the medical terminology. She would probably be more of a sociopath than a psychopath. Social logical reasons versus psychological reasons, although in her case they were both. But today they really combine those terms in the medical field, and they call it the antisocial personality disorder. And so in medical today you don't hear much about sociopaths or psychopaths, because they're both basically the same outward symptoms. It's caused by sociological factors or psychological factors. Either way, you're going to come up with a person that has no empathy, has no conscience, basically uses people, abuses people, discards people.
Very narcissistic.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where the FBI has now gotten specialists into the psychology and breaking down behavior of
our behavioral science unit back
at
at Quantico, which is where our training center is. I worked a lot with those guys because one of my specialties in the FBI for 15 years was crisis negotiation. So we worked hand in hand with the behavioral scientists.
So now how many people total did she kill?
At least 3, and she's suspected of another 2.
Okay, and now are her son and daughter still alive?
Carol has made pretty much a full recovery. And of course, her son Michael still ministers in Florida. I'm not sure the exact name of the community. But even a twist there that we have a serial murderer and the son is a minister. I mean, it's just, like you say, all these different lines, strings,
different layers of
trails that you can...
Yeah,
the
like
layers is great, like an onion. You just continue to peel them off.
Just the part that we knew about this, it was beginning to branch out to where I'm like, oh, hold it, I'm getting overwhelmed here. So let me ask you, as a retired FBI agent, so Kelly here watches forensic files, as she's addicted to forensic files. Shortly after she started watching these, binge watching, if you will, I started finding these notes around with little diagrams with like stick figures with my name on them.
Yes.
And different things being pointed at me. Should I worry?
If it's Kelly, if you think Kelly is a suspect, I would definitely worry. Just from the brief time that we've spent together here today.
Back up the camera now. I don't know how you're getting home though.
I believe I drove.
I will.
Did she say she drove?
Yeah, I will scan these and email these to you so you can forward them on to the authorities. Okay, I have nothing to worry about.
Question?
Yes, go right ahead.
An actual, real, live, honest-to-goodness question.
And these were not?
No, they're not. So I know that you're retired and everything, but tell me a little bit about what you can glean from Samuel Little. This man who is supposedly the worst serial killer in history.
I wasn't even aware, basically, in the news of Samuel Little till about 2 years ago. A fascinating case. The fact that he was incarcerated for a number of years before they really even went to interview him. And then the association that the investigative officer was able to bond with him in such a way, and when anytime you interview people, they say, well, okay, yeah, I've killed before. Well, how many? Well, I don't know, probably 90.
Yeah, he's admitted to 93.
Yeah, right. Sure.
Wow.
Because you had a lot of cases during that period of the 80s, 90s, where, everybody was getting their fame, the Ted Bundys and stuff. And so you had guys like Otis Toole and his partner. Oh, man, I can't think of his name. I draw a blank every once in a while, folks.
So do I.
But they were partners in the South, and of course, they claimed to have killed 50 or 60 people, and Henry Lucas was his partner.
Okay.
And Henry Lucas, if you talk to him for 10 or 15 minutes, he would admit to any serial murder you wanted to talk about. Because he'd heard about it in the jail or somebody, and he knew just enough to pique the investigative's interest, and then talk to the investigative enough and learn just enough to keep the conversation going. And so you had these guys that wanted to be the world's best serial killer. I've killed more than anybody else. And now all of a sudden we have Little coming in, admitting to between 90 and 93. And I think I just seen an article this week in the paper where they've confirmed almost 60 of those deaths.
What it was, yeah.
And so this guy appears to be really
and it was
shooting
all
straight.
over. I mean, it's not even in like a 2 or 3
No.
I mean, it's like all over the U.S. this guy's been.
Yeah, and of course, which is, if you're going to be a serial killer and you really want to be a serial killer, well, then what we call the transient, the one that moves all the time, obviously it's not as difficult today because there's much better communication when we start having a serial murder here and serial murder there. But back in the 1980s, I mean, when I first started the FBI, I mean, there wasn't a lot of sharing, and you didn't have the ability to share as quickly.
Right.
Today, you can have teleconference meetings where you can sit down and talk, have a group from 5 different jurisdictions, quote, in the room talking, and so things have changed, thank goodness, for the better. But Little is wow.
Yeah. I just, having read everything and seeing the different stories and news things, I'm like, whoa, this guy, whoa. I would love to interview him just to try and pick his brain. I mean, just, oh.
And
Crazy.
what led him, it's just, you often wonder what leads a guy that's been incarcerated, and I'm not sure how long he's been incarcerated, but a number of years, to all of a sudden just connect with somebody that talks to him about something, and goes on. We had the devastating kidnapping, sexual assault, murder of Lorraine Kirkley by David Malinsky here in Valpo, and of course murders are basically local police jurisdiction. As the FBI, we normally don't get involved in this case. Porter County requested our assistance. Wanted to know if we'd work it jointly with them, and we did. So after David Malinsky was convicted, and of course that was a case where David Malinsky was convicted without a body being found. It was like, I think either 5 or 7 years. Just one day he struck up a conversation with the prison chaplain. They connected, and within about a month, David told the chaplain he wanted to tell where the body was. Why that chaplain at that time? I have no idea. But it was good to be able to bring some closure for the family in that type of a case, because those are just horrific cases.
Yeah. So you grew up in Michigan City, LaPorte area, so maybe subconsciously you knew all about Bill Gunnis and all of that stuff, and maybe that's why you became a...
Yeah, we always used to go, this time of the year, we'd get a car.
You notice how familiar Kelly is with all these mass murders?
I actually played her in a play. That's why I know more about her.
Ooh, and I bet you did it real well.
I did.
This time of the year, we'd always get a group in the car after youth meeting or some type of meeting.
Can I tell you, I'm very scared right now.
We used to drive out to Bill Gunnis' farm, and everybody'd get out of the car and everybody'd say, "What's that moving over there?" And see who
super interesting.
Yeah, and see who the biggest chicken was, who yelled the loudest and the longest. And then pile back in the car and laugh all the way back to where we came from.
Well, Professor Jerry Holt, who is head of the English department at Purdue.
Yeah.
And in Westville, he wrote a play about her. And
Oh, yeah.
I'd seen some things about her at the LaPorte History Museum.
Yes.
But he wrote this play, which was a comedy.
Yeah.
But, which I played Belle Guinness in
Yeah.
it. And
That
very interesting. And
that
just
does not
really,
surprise me at all.
Yeah.
That
thank you.
surprised me. Well, listen, we got to wrap things
Oh,
up
sure, I
here.
understand.
Oh, my gosh,
but
so
listen,
interesting.
we've been so honored to have you on. Anytime we have a member of law enforcement, these are the people we owe our safety to. And you made mention about a tie that you had before we started recording that had the Constitution on it, the signatures
Yes.
and so on. Guard our safety and to make sure that rights are protected and to enforce federal law to its fullest extent. And one thing that you all have to take, I think that's what people really don't understand today, how much you guys do on our behalf. And so on behalf of our community, we would like to thank you for your
Absolutely.
service and
Putting your life on
for
the
all
line
your
for us.
comrades and their duty that they serve in the FBI and all law enforcement officials and your service in the military.
Wow. Well, thank you, and I know
Absolutely.
all my fellow agents, both retired and active, appreciate your sentiments and your kind words about the work that we do.
Yeah, I mean, because there's sometimes that people just don't appreciate and what you guys do, and there's so much you can't tell the community because it's under investigation, and a lot of times they won't know until a warrant is served and you guys come rolling up with the tape and handcuffs and.
Yes.
Surprise.
Surprise, yes.
Yeah, Kelly, surprise. All right, with that, we'll wrap up the show, and now we'll run like the devil. Thank you very much again for
Thank you
being
so
on.
much.
Well, thank you
Appreciate
for
it.
extending the invitation.
Well,
It's
it-
just been my pleasure
so
to
interesting.
spend a few minutes with me. I think time went faster than I thought it would.
Appreciate it. And with that, we'll say goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye for now.
Bye.
This episode of The Bill and Callie Show is brought to you by Tiger Plumbing. Whether you need to replace a faucet, overhaul your sump pump, or desludge your drains, call Tiger Plumbing. In today's world, knowing who's at your door is important. Tiger Plumbing sends you your technician's photo, estimated time of arrival, and a little bit about him or her. Hey, Sam likes fishing and camping. Cool.